AITA for canceling my wedding on the spot when my fiancé's family mocked my late mom? I'm 33 years old, and until recently, I was engaged to Chloe, a woman I sincerely thought I would spend the rest of my life with. I met her about 7 years ago at a 4th of July barbecue hosted by mutual friends. She had an incredible smile, a sharp sense of humor, and we hit it off right away. When I decided to propose to her a year ago, I didn't hesitate for a second. It felt like the right time, the right person. At the time, I wasn't just marrying Chloe. In a way, I was also marrying her family. Her parents, Richard and Helen, are the type who always want to be the center of attention. They are loud, always have an opinion on everything, and always have a comment to make. At first, I thought it was just their personality, but over time, I realized that their inflated sense of self-importance contaminated everything they did. Before getting to the point, let me tell you about my mother. Her name was Eleanor, and she was undoubtedly the best person I have ever known. She passed away 2 years ago after a difficult 3-year battle with cancer. Seeing her fight this disease while continuing to put others first was deeply moving. She taught me so much about kindness, generosity, and the courage to stand up for what is right. My mother was not only my rock, she was a true pillar of support for many people. She had this ability to help others without ever making them uncomfortable or making them feel like they owed her anything. She simply did the right thing quietly, and that included Chloe's family. Richard and Helen owe her a tremendous amount. Even if listening to them today, you would never guess it. When I first introduced Chloe to my mother, everything went quite well. My mother liked her, she told me so, and Chloe seemed polite. But as our relationship progressed, the more I saw that the two women didn't really get along. It was nothing spectacular, just little remarks here and there, like when Chloe would say my mother was too involved or too overbearing. It bothered me, but I told myself that perhaps it just took time for her to adapt to a new family dynamic. The thing is, my mother did a lot for Chloe's family. Years ago, when their upscale bistro was on the verge of bankruptcy, it was my mother who co-signed a business loan to help them. No bank would have taken that risk, but she believed in them. She even helped them reorganize their finances and implement a business plan to make the bistro profitable again. And it worked. The business survived, and Richard and Helen were able to keep their livelihood. But that is not all. When the bistro's commercial-grade oven broke down and they couldn't afford a new one, my mother paid the $20,000 bill herself because she did not want them to lose customers. She never asked to be reimbursed, even though she could have used that money for her own medical care. That was just like her. And then there was Kevin, Chloe's older brother. He was struggling to finish his master's degree because he couldn't pay for his last semester. My mother stepped in and settled his tuition bill just so he could graduate. She always said education is something no one can take away. She did not just give money. She gave her time and her energy. She spent hours helping Chloe's family, whether it was with accounting advice or babysitting Kevin's children so he could study for his finals. And let me tell you that at no point did Richard, Helen, or Kevin thank her properly. Sure, they said thanks in passing, but there was never any real gratitude. My mother didn't care, though. She wasn't looking for praise. She just wanted to help. When my mother passed away, I was devastated. She was everything to me, and her loss left an immense void. Chloe was there for me through the worst of it, or so I thought. Looking back, I realized that her support was often limited to the bare minimum. She would say things to me like, "You need to move forward," or "Your mother wouldn't want you to stay stuck in grief." Maybe she was right, but at the time, it wasn't comforting. It was cold, almost condescending. While planning the wedding, I started seeing other red flags. Chloe was strangely distant whenever I talked about my mother. For instance, I wanted to include a small tribute to my mother during the ceremony, and Chloe simply replied, "Don't you think that will make people sad? A wedding is supposed to be joyful." I let it go to avoid an argument, but these kinds of remarks kept piling up. Then there were Richard and Helen's comments. They had this way of speaking to me with condescension, as if Chloe was marrying someone beneath her. Richard once joked about Chloe elevating my status since she was marrying a guy from a more modest background. Helen, on the other hand, would often say, "Well, we all make sacrifices for love," as if Chloe was doing me a favor. It hurt, but I kept quiet for Chloe's sake. Looking back, I should have stood up for myself sooner. Maybe I would have spared myself a lot of pain. But I kept telling myself that once the wedding was over and the dust settled, everything would be better. I was completely wrong. A month before the wedding, everything started to go off the rails. As I mentioned, Chloe's parents, Richard and Helen, offered to host the rehearsal dinner at a fancy restaurant they knew. At first, I thought it was nice. I told myself it might be their way of easing the tension. I even thought to myself, maybe they are trying to show a little class this time. But to understand the mood, you have to know that Richard and Helen didn't just organize. They bragged about it constantly. Helen would tell everyone, "We put so much effort into making this dinner perfect. It will be the event of the year." Richard never missed an opportunity to point out that the restaurant was one of the best in the city and that we were lucky to get a reservation. All of this was starting to look less like a generous gesture and more like an ego trip. But I turned a blind eye. I wanted everything to go smoothly. So, I let them do it. Big mistake. The closer the date got, the more their true nature came out. Every conversation became a series of jabs or passive-aggressive remarks. For example, when I wanted to confirm the guest list, Helen rolled her eyes and told me, "Leave it, Ethan, we're taking care of it. Don't stress over the details. Just show up and enjoy." It was seemingly harmless, but it annoyed me. After all, it was supposed to be our event, and Chloe and I should have had a say. And the menu? Helen made a huge fuss explaining that they had created a high-end dining experience. She would say, "The chef prepared something truly special. Nothing like what you find where you're from, Ethan." That last remark, "where you're from," was her favorite. She loved reminding me that I didn't come from the same background, that I grew up in a small working-class town, and they never let me forget it. I tried to keep things in perspective, telling myself it was only one evening. Smile, nod, and push through. But even Chloe was starting to act weird. She had always tended to side with her parents, but in the weeks leading up to the dinner, it was worse. Every time I expressed an idea or a concern, she would reply, "Ethan, you're overthinking it. My parents know what they're doing." The problem was that it was no longer just about a dinner. It was the way they made me feel like an outsider in my own relationship, as if I should be grateful that Chloe even wanted me. And Chloe never defended me. Worse still, she would laugh with them or tell me to let it go. A week before the dinner, an incident should have made everything clear to me. We were at her parents' house to finalize a few wedding details. Helen was in total control mode, flipping through seating charts and flower catalogs as if she were planning a royal wedding. At one point, I suggested changing the centerpieces to something simpler, in a style my mother would have liked. Helen didn't even look up from her binder. She simply blurted out, "Oh, Eleanor had peculiar tastes, didn't she? Let's keep it modern. It's Chloe's big day." I froze. It was a subtle but terribly hurtful remark. And Chloe? Nothing. She kept scrolling on her phone as if nothing had happened. I wanted to react, but I swallowed my anger to avoid a conflict. Looking back, I regret not speaking up. Every little humiliation piled up, and I let it happen to keep an artificial peace. The day of the rehearsal dinner finally arrived, and I could already feel the tension in the air. Chloe and I drove to the restaurant together, and I tried to lighten the mood a bit with some small talk. She, on the other hand, remained silent, her eyes glued to her phone, barely responding. When I asked her if she was excited for tonight, she just shrugged and said, "It's just dinner, Ethan. Don't make a big deal out of it." When we arrived at the restaurant, Richard and Helen were already there, acting as if they owned the place. Richard stood at the entrance, shaking hands with guests as they arrived, while Helen gave sharp orders to the staff. The whole scene felt more like a corporate gala than a family gathering. The restaurant itself was incredibly luxurious. White tablecloths, sparkling chandeliers, gleaming silverware, the kind of place that screams, "Look how important we are." And honestly, I had never felt so out of place. As the guests trickled in, I noticed something strange. Almost everyone was from Chloe's side. There were maybe only 3 or 4 people from my side: my dad, my sister, and a few close friends. Everyone else was either Chloe's family members or her parents' business associates. It was clear they had turned this rehearsal dinner into a social event to show off. I pulled Chloe aside and asked her why there were hardly any people from my family here. She gave me an annoyed look and replied, "Ethan, your family is small. My parents had to fill the room one way or another. It's no big deal. It's no big deal." That was always her answer. I gritted my teeth and went back to mingling with the guests. But deep down, I knew this dinner had nothing to do with us. It was the Richard and Helen show. They had hijacked what was supposed to be a celebration of our relationship to turn it into their own spectacle of prestige. After the meal, the real event began, the speeches. Richard was the first to take the microphone. Of course, he grabbed it as if he were about to give a lecture to investors, not like a father speaking about his daughter's wedding. He cleared his throat and began, "Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we celebrate the union of two families, our dear Chloe and, of course, Ethan." He pronounced my name as if he had a bitter taste in his mouth. I sat there, trying to keep my cool, but every single one of his sentences was a thinly veiled insult. He talked about his pride in Chloe, the star of the family, the one who always knew what she wanted in life, and who was now marrying someone who would keep her grounded. He gave a little mocking smile as he said that, and I swore I heard a few chuckles in the room. I stared at him, wondering if I had heard correctly. Then he talked about how Chloe had always been a model student, and how glad he was that she had followed their advice to stay on the right track. At one point, he said, "You know, we always taught Chloe to aim high." And even though Ethan might not be exactly what we had in mind initially, he paused, leaving the sentence hanging as if it were supposed to be funny. I could feel my dad and sister glaring at him from the other end of the table. Then it was Helen's turn. She stepped up to the microphone like an actress walking onto a stage to accept an award. Her speech started off well enough. She talked about Chloe, her love for her, and the excitement of the wedding. But soon, she slipped in some jabs at me. She declared that Chloe was the perfect daughter who deserved the best in life, before adding, "Fortunately, she is patient because she has already taught Ethan so much." I almost choked on my water. Taught me what? To swallow my pride while her parents ridiculed me at every turn? Then Helen turned to me and said, "We are so happy to welcome you to the family, Ethan. It will be nice to finally have someone who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty." She burst out laughing, and a few of her relatives did the same. I looked at Chloe, hoping she would step in or at least look embarrassed. But no, she was smiling, amused. And just when I thought the night couldn't get any worse, Richard took the microphone back. He clinked his glass and said, "Before wrapping up, I would like to acknowledge someone who is no longer with us but who meant a lot in Ethan's life, his mother, Eleanor." For a split second, I thought he was going to say something kind. But no, he added, "Eleanor was one of a kind. She had a tendency to get a little too involved in other people's business. She always had an opinion on everything." He laughed, and Helen chimed in. "Oh yes, she had strong opinions. Do you remember how she always insisted on helping us, even when we didn't ask for it?" I couldn't believe my ears. He was talking about my mother like she was some nosy neighbor. Richard continued, "A real force of nature, but in all seriousness, Eleanor was a generous woman. She helped us a lot, sometimes even a little too much, if you ask me." He winked as if it were an inside joke. The room went ice cold, but he went on. "We will make sure to keep her spirit alive during the wedding. Let's just hope Ethan doesn't inherit her need to manage everything." It was too much. I felt my face burning, my fists clenched under the table. I looked at Chloe, waiting for her to say something, anything, to stop them. But she just laughed and said, "Oh, Dad, stop it." He had just mocked my mother's memory in front of everyone, and Chloe found it amusing. The worst part was that Richard and Helen looked proud of themselves, convinced that everyone was laughing along with them. But looking around me, I could clearly see that was not the case. When Richard finally finished his speech, the awkwardness was palpable. The clinking of silverware and glasses resumed timidly, as if people were trying to forget the disaster they had just witnessed. Chloe leaned over to me and whispered, "Are you okay?" in a casual tone, as if she were asking if I wanted more water, not if I was boiling with rage. I didn't even look at her. I just nodded, my jaw clenched so tight I was afraid my teeth would crack. Then Helen approached our table. "Ethan," she said in a honeyed tone, "I hope you weren't offended. Richard and I just wanted to lighten the mood a bit. It was all in good fun, you know." That was the moment something snapped inside me. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Are you serious right now?" I said in a low voice, trembling with anger. And there I was, standing in the middle of the rehearsal dinner, my chair still slightly tilted behind me. The entire room went silent as if the sound had been muted in a movie. All eyes were fixed on me, but I didn't care. My heart was pounding, and my face was burning. But I knew I couldn't let this slide. Richard and Helen's mockery of my mother was already unacceptable, but this fake apology from Helen was the last straw. Are you serious right now? I repeated, my eyes locked on Helen. She froze, clearly not expecting me to confront her. Richard looked up from his glass, offended. Chloe, next to me, whispered, Ethan, stop. But I ignored her. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice rising a notch. You spent the evening dragging my mother's memory through the mud, the woman who helped your family when no one else would. And now, you claim it was a joke. Do you think that's normal? Richard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Relax, Ethan, he replied with a smirk. You're overreacting. It was just a joke. Just a joke, I shot back. You called her a busybody. You said she meddled in everything. You ridiculed her generosity as if it were a flaw. Where is the humor in that? The atmosphere was suffocating. I saw some of Chloe's cousins staring awkwardly at their plates. My dad was glaring daggers at Richard, ready to jump up. My sister, arms crossed, stared at Helen with cold hatred. Helen tried to laugh it off. Oh, Ethan, don't be so sensitive. We were just sharing a few anecdotes. Everyone knows how much Eleanor loved to run everything. I couldn't believe my ears. Run everything? I repeated, my voice shaking. She helped you. She saved your business when you were on the verge of bankruptcy. She paid for your oven, your patio renovations, and Kevin's tuition. And this is how you thank her? By mocking her in front of everyone. Richard sat up abruptly, visibly annoyed. All right, that's enough, he said in an authoritative tone. We meant no harm. But if you're going to make a scene over this, maybe you're not ready for this family. That sentence chilled me to the bone. It showed all the contempt he had for me and for my mother. Chloe finally intervened, tugging gently on my sleeve. Ethan, please, let's step outside and talk. I yanked my arm away. No, Chloe, we aren't going anywhere. Not until your parents understand just how disrespectful they've been. Helen let out a theatrical sigh, as if she were the victim. Ethan, this is supposed to be a joyous occasion. You're ruining the evening for everyone. I'm ruining the evening? I said, my voice trembling with anger. No, Helen, you ruined everything the moment you decided to insult my mother in front of this entire room. And you, Chloe, you just sat there and did nothing. Chloe's face turned red. I didn't know they were going to say all that, she replied defensively. But you laughed, I shot back. You laughed at every insult. You didn't even try to stop them. By that point, the whispers in the room had begun to grow louder. People were leaning toward one another, murmuring about the scene unfolding before their eyes. I felt their judgment weighing heavily on me, but I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was a matter of respect for my mother. Richard stood up, clearly exasperated. Fine, Ethan, if you're so offended, maybe you should leave, he said, pointing to the door. For a moment, I thought about it. I considered just walking out, leaving them to enjoy their perfect little dinner. But when I looked at my dad, my sister, and my few friends who had come to support me, I realized I couldn't let Richard and Helen get away with it. Not this time. No, I said firmly. I'm not leaving. Not until you understand what you've done. Richard opened his mouth to reply, but I cut him off. You act like my mother was some overbearing woman, but without her, you wouldn't even have this bistro or your precious connections. She never did any of it for recognition or praise. She did it because she cared about people. And now, you dare drag her memory through the mud as if it were a joke. It's not just disrespectful. It's disgusting. The room fell into total silence once again. Even Richard seemed caught off guard, not knowing what to say. Helen opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Chloe stayed frozen, her eyes glued to the table, caught between shame and anger. Finally, Richard muttered, "We didn't mean it like that." "It doesn't matter how you meant it," I replied. "What matters is how it came across. You have no right to rewrite who my mother was just to fit your narrative. She deserved better than that, and frankly, so do I." With those words, I took a step back, grabbed my jacket, and said, "You want me to leave? Fine, but don't count on me coming back." My dad stood up immediately, ready to follow me. My sister grabbed her purse and shot one last withering glare at Helen before joining us. My friend stood up as well, uncertain but supportive. Chloe called out to me, "Ethan, wait." But I didn't stop. I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, even though my heart was pounding out of my chest. Outside, my dad put a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "Your mother would be proud of you." I nodded, but I didn't feel proud. I felt angry and betrayed. And I realized something. If Chloe was incapable of standing up to defend me or my mother, then she wasn't the person I thought she was. A part of me thought I had done the right thing by leaving, but another part felt it wasn't enough. If I left things as they were, Chloe and her family would twist the situation, painting me as the overly sensitive guy who blew everything out of proportion. No, I couldn't let them do that. It was no longer just a matter of self-respect. It was a matter of respect for my mother, for her memory, for my values. I took a deep breath and turned to my dad. "I have to go back in," I said. "What?" my sister exclaimed. "Why? You don't owe them anything." "I know," I replied, looking at her. "But I don't want to leave it like this. I need to be clear with Chloe, with her parents, with everyone. This is over for good." My dad hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "If it's what you have to do, we've got your back." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This is something I have to do alone." My sister looked like she wanted to protest, but she held back. I turned around and headed back toward the restaurant. My stomach was in knots, but my mind was clear. I wasn't going back to cause a scene. I was going back to end this story. Conversations died down as I walked through the door. All eyes turned toward me. Chloe was still sitting at the table. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Ethan," she said, standing up, "what are you doing?" I ignored her question and headed straight for the front of the room, where Richard and Helen were still sitting, looking smug. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to see me back. Helen plastered on that same fake smile she had been wearing from the start. "Back already?" Richard tossed out sarcastically. I didn't even bother answering him. I turned to the entire room. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice loud and clear enough to cut through the quiet. All eyes were locked on me once again. My heart was racing, but my voice remained steady. "I have something to say." I cast a glance at Chloe, frozen near the table, her hands clenched in front of her. "I know this is neither the time nor the place you were expecting, but after what just happened tonight, I see no reason to wait any longer." I took a deep breath and said it. "The wedding is off." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, chairs scraping the floor. People looked at each other in shock. Chloe's jaw dropped. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Ethan, no," she whispered. I raised a hand to stop her. Silence fell again, heavy and absolute. Even the waiters stood frozen in the corners of the room. "It's not just because of tonight," I said. "It's because of what it represents, the kind of family I was about to marry into. A family that doesn't respect me, that doesn't respect my mother, and that doesn't respect the values I was raised on. I cannot and will not spend the rest of my life being treated this way." Richard finally found his voice. "You're making a huge mistake, kid," he said in a contemptuous tone. "You're ruining everything for nothing." I let out a bitter laugh. "For nothing? You think disrespecting my mother is nothing? You think treating me like a nobody is nothing?" "No, Richard. The mistake would be going through with this wedding and tying myself to a family that doesn't deserve my respect." Helen, for her part, looked on the verge of tears, or perhaps she was simply humiliated that their little spectacle had backfired on them. "Ethan," she said in a trembling voice, "let's not make any rash decisions. We can talk about this tomorrow when everyone has calmed down." "No," I replied firmly. "We won't talk about it tomorrow or ever. It's over." I turned to Chloe one last time. Her face was covered in tears. She no longer knew whether to scream or beg. I walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Just as I placed my hand on the handle, I heard Chloe cry out behind me. "Ethan, please, don't do this." I stopped for a second, then I turned back to her and said calmly, "It's already done." Leaving that restaurant felt like ripping off a Band-Aid. Yes, it hurt, but what I felt afterward was relief. It was over. The wedding, the constant contempt, the feeling of always being second best in a family that would never have been mine. All of that was behind me. The next morning, the real fallout began. I woke up to 100 unread text messages. Most were from Chloe, a few from Richard and Helen, and even 2 or 3 from their family members I barely knew. The messages ranged from begging to pure insults. Chloe's were full of remorse. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, talk to me." Richard's were more aggressive. "You humiliated us in front of everyone. You're going to regret this." And Helen played the victim. I can't believe you did this to Chloe. She didn't deserve this. I ignored all the messages. By mid-afternoon, Chloe showed up at my apartment. I was expecting it. I had been bracing myself for it all day, but that didn't make it any easier. When I opened the door, she looked exhausted. Her eyes were red, her face swollen and blotchy from crying. She was still wearing the dress from the night before, as if she had gone home and cried herself to sleep. "Ethan," she said in a shaky voice. "Can we please talk?" I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Talk about what, Chloe? I was pretty clear last night." She flinched as if I had just slapped her, but she stood her ground. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be," she said. "But we can fix this. We can get through this." I shook my head. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't something that can be fixed." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice cracking. I was scared. Okay. I didn't know what to do. Scared of what? I shot back, my frustration boiling over. Scared of upsetting your parents? Scared of making a scene? She didn't answer. She just stood there crying while I looked at her, hoping for a word, a gesture, something to prove she truly understood what she had done. But nothing came. Her eyes widened, and she took a step toward me. "Please, Ethan," she whispered. "Don't do this. We can work it out. I'll talk to my parents. I'll make them apologize, but don't end everything like this." I shook my head again. "It's not just about your parents, Chloe. It's about you. Last night showed me exactly who you are, and I can't forget that. I deserve better than this." She stared at me for a moment before her face crumpled under the weight of reality. One Saturday afternoon, I was organizing my mother's keepsake box. It's an item I have treasured ever since she passed away. Inside was her favorite necklace, a pair of earrings she wore on special occasions, and a delicate little locket containing a picture of my grandmother. That locket had been in our family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter. Before she died, my mother gave it to me, saying, "One day, you'll know who the right person is to give this to." I had always kept it safely tucked away in that box. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a part of her, of our history. But that day, when I opened the box, I noticed the locket was missing. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I searched every corner, checked the drawers, the shelves, even under the bed. Nothing. And then, my heart sank. Someone had taken it. And the only person who had been in my apartment recently, aside from my family and a few close friends, was Chloe. My stomach tied in knots as everything became clear in my head. She had stopped by a few days after the breakup to return the engagement ring. Before leaving, she had asked if she could use the bathroom. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, it all made sense. I grabbed my phone and texted her. "Did you take the locket from my mother's keepsake box?" A few minutes later, she replied, "What are you talking about?" I didn't buy it for a second. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The locket my mother left me is missing. You're the only one who has been at my place recently. Did you take it?" She didn't reply right away, but when she did, her message made my blood boil. "I borrowed it because I wanted to keep a little piece of her with me. I thought it would help me feel closer to you." Borrowed. She dared to say she had borrowed it without asking, without so much as a word. I couldn't believe it. I immediately called her. When she picked up, her tone was defensive, as if she were the victim. "Ethan, it's not that big of a deal," she said. "I was going to give it back to you." "Not a big deal." I exploded. "That locket has been in my family for generations. It's not some trinket you can just take because you feel like it. How could you possibly think that was acceptable?" "I just wanted to feel connected to you," she said, her voice trembling as she fished for pity. "I didn't think you would notice." "Of course I would notice," I yelled. "It was my mother's. And the fact that you didn't even think to ask me first makes it so much worse." She started to cry, but I was in no mood to be sympathetic. "Where is it?" I demanded. "It's at my parents' house," she admitted between sobs. "I didn't want to lose it, so I left it there to keep it safe." "That was too much. You took something that didn't belong to you, something that means infinitely more to me than you could ever understand. And you left it at your parents' house?" "Seriously." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I replied in an icy tone. "I'm coming to get it right now." An hour later, I was parked in front of Richard and Helen's house. My anger had built during the entire drive, and when I knocked on the door, I was on the verge of exploding. Helen opened the door, her eternal honeyed smile fading as soon as she saw my face. Ethan, she said cautiously, what are you doing here? I'm here for my mother's locket, I replied curtly. Chloe told me it's here. Helen's face went from confusion to annoyance. Chloe took a locket? Why isn't she the one coming to get it? I cut her off. Just let me get it back. She narrowed her eyes, then finally stepped aside to let me in. A few minutes later, Chloe came down the stairs, locket in hand. Her eyes were swollen, her face still covered in tears, but I felt nothing. All I saw was that piece of our family history dangling from her fingers as if it held no value. Here, she said, holding it out to me. I snatched it out of her hands and inspected it to make sure it was the right one. Once satisfied, I shoved it in my pocket and turned to leave. Ethan, wait, she said desperately. I didn't mean to hurt you. You wanted to keep it safe, is that it? I said, cutting her off. No, Chloe. You took something that doesn't belong to you. You took from my mother, as if everything you had already done wasn't enough. Her face crumbled and she started crying again, but I didn't stop. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. In the days that followed, I blocked her number, deleted her messages, and cut off every possible way for her to contact me. I was done with her family, and with all the drama they had brought into my life. Breaking off the engagement had been hard, but this was the final nail in the coffin. And as exhausting as it all was, it brought real closure. I had stood up for myself, for my mother, and for the values she had passed down to me. I knew I had made the right decision. And for the first time in a long time, I finally felt at peace. Comment. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Sometimes, the hardest decisions we make are the ones that save us from a lifetime of quiet heartbreak. Walking away from people who constantly disrespect our core values is an act of profound courage. True kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. We all deserve to be surrounded by those who respect our boundaries and appreciate the goodness we bring into their lives. Choosing your peace over maintaining a fake sense of peace for others is a necessary step toward healing. Letting go of relationships that no longer serve your growth makes room for the right people to enter your life. I hope today's video inspires you to hold your head high and fiercely protect your energy. Please take a moment to share your thoughts on setting healthy boundaries in the comments section below. I wish you all a beautiful and peaceful day. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.